Hey everybody, Joe Brady here, and I'm at one of my favorite places nearby my house. This is called Shohola Falls. It's in Pennsylvania, a little bit north of Milford, and it's just a spectacular setting. And I thought it was a great place to introduce you to something new, and it's the color checker passport from X-Rite. And you're saying, well, wait a second, Joe. You've been showing me this thing for more than 10 years. What's changed? Well, just to review what's still here, I've got the color adjustment chart. I have the color checker passport classic chart that allows us to create custom camera profiles. And then on the other side, I've got something new. So you probably remember this. That's the white balance card that allows you to white balance under any lighting circumstances. But what's new is this one. It's the addition of an 18% gray card to the color checker. Now you might think this was always the thing you were going to do white balance off instead of this. But there's some other things you can do with this that might not be obvious at first glance. One of the things I love about the color checker 18% gray card is it's a great way to figure out the perfect exposure. You can wonder how that's going to happen. Well, case in point, right behind me I've got the falls. The water is very dark, and then the cascades themselves are very white. So what's the correct exposure? And if I go by my camera's meter, what's going to happen is, depending on how much white or dark is in the frame, it's going to change the exposure. Yet there shouldn't be any reason for that, because the sun is hitting them all evenly. But the fact that you're cropping in the camera and changing the percentage of dark to light in the frame is going to give you a different exposure. We don't want that. We want to nail the perfect exposure and stay there. So what I can do is have the card in the sun. I want to have it reflecting perpendicular to the sun. Take a reading off of this. I'll put my camera on manual. I'm going to adjust until this gives me, with the camera set for spot metering by the way, until this gives me a perfect reading right on 0. That's going to be a perfect exposure. At that point, I can forget what the camera's trying to do, just put it on manual, and that'll give me a perfect exposure everywhere I go. Now, by the way, yes, I do prefer using this target for white balance. However, if you're concerned about clipping, maybe you overexposed a little bit, this does give you a safety backup that you can white balance of also. Also, you might find that this works better for video. In fact, what I'll do is I will white balance this video using this target. In fact, here we go. There's a little video clip of this in the frame so that I can take this into Adobe Premiere, which is what I use, and white balance off of it. So let me show you how you do this to prepare for this shot. It's really very simple. Okay, so I got my camera here. It's a Sony a7R III, and let's just take a look and see what the camera tells me when I use the camera's meter to tell me what's going on behind me. So as I look back there and I take in the entire scene, the camera is telling me 125th of a second at f9.5, and I'm at 100 ISO. However, let me see what happens if I zoom in on one of these cascades that's got more white in it. So when I zoomed in to 70 millimeters on that cascade behind me, I got a different exposure. It went from 9.5 to f13. It's a complete stop difference. That's a lot of light difference. So let's see what the meter says when I take a reading off of the gray card. So again, remember, I'm on spot metering on the camera. And when I tilt this up towards the sun and take a reading off of it, it says that at f13, I'm a full stop underexposed. Don't want that. So let's go ahead and adjust the exposure for this based on what the gray card is telling us. All right, so I take a reading and I adjust my exposure, and back to 9.5 at 125th of a second. Now it tells me that's the perfect exposure, which just happens to be the exposure we got when we let the camera take in the entire scene. However, I don't want to take that kind of guesswork. By having this reference and take a reading off the gray card, I know it's a perfect exposure, because it doesn't care what the camera's pointing at. It doesn't care how I crop. The exposure off of this gray card in the sun is how much light is hitting right here. And the light hitting right here is the same light that's hitting out there. So if I take this shot now close up with the f9.5 instead of the f13, it's not going to look so dingy. It's going to be correctly exposed. All right, so I go ahead and take those shots, and by the way, my camera, when I zoomed into the different cascades around, told me that at 9.5 I was a full stop overexposed. But we know, because of the gray card taking the reading off of the sun hitting us above, that it was the perfect exposure. Now while I'm here, I'm going to go ahead and take a shot of the color checker itself, the color checker target, so that I can also create a custom camera profile for this spot. I do need to make sure that I'm not casting any shadow on it. I want to make sure there's no branches casting a shadow. And there we go. Now I have a shot of this that I can then use as a reference to create a custom camera profile, and we're going to have a perfect exposure. So let's bring it into software and take a look and see how you do that.
Alrighty now, so here we are in Lightroom, and just showing a picture of the 18% gray target, and this is what I use to get my exposure. And again, just to go over it one more time, with my camera set on spot metering, I've got this angled up towards the sun. I want to get my reading off of here, so I have my camera on manual. I choose my ISO, and then I adjust my shutter and aperture until the dial, the meter inside the camera, shows me 0. That means I have a perfect exposure. So once we've got our exposure, then that brings us on to shooting the color checker target itself. Now, if we take a look at the histogram up top, we can see that, boy, it is right to the edge, left to right. You can see it in the upper right over here. But we're not clipping. In fact, we can click on the highlight warning here and see that nothing is clipping. Now, there's a tendency to want to think, oh, I don't want to clip. I want to make sure that everything's here. In fact, if I put the magnifying glass over the bright white patch, you can see now under the histogram as I go there, we'll get some numbers, and we can see it's 98.6, 98.6, 98.6, which is perfectly neutral and is very bright. Now, there's a tendency to think, well, geez, maybe I need to bring down the highlights a bit, and you see we get more detail in the water back there. But when the software goes to read the target, it's going to ignore all that, because remember, in Lightroom, when you do these things, these are just a set of instructions on what to do when you export the image. So the profile maker is going to completely ignore any adjustments you use here. So don't concern yourself about the white balance or any of the settings, because it's going to go back to the raw file and find this target. So now it's ready to make a profile. Well, watch this. This is how easy it is. Once you've installed the software for the Color Checker Passport, when you go under File, Export with Preset, you'll see it now says Color Checker Camera Calibration. So we click on that, and you just give it a name. Now I'm just going to name it after the camera that was used. In this case, it was a Sony A6300, not 63,000, and it was at Shohola Falls. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to give it a name, click on Save, and that's how easy it is to create a custom camera profile. Now you can see up in the upper left-hand side here, it says it's processing the profile. Oh, it takes anywhere from 20 to 40 seconds, and then it's going to come up with a message for us to restart Lightroom. Because Lightroom needs to be restarted, well, there it is. Restart Lightroom so that it can actually see the profile. So we'll hit OK here. And I'm going to go ahead and restart, and then I'll be right back. All right, so I've gone ahead and restarted Lightroom, and again, here's our target. In fact, let's make it a little bigger. Is 1 to 2 too much? Actually, that's pretty good. So let's bring it right up here in the middle, because here's where I really want you to see what happens with this profile. We know that our exposure is great. In fact, again, if we look at the histogram, the exposure that we got from metering off of the gray card was absolutely perfect. Right over to the right, right over to the left. However, we're using right now the Adobe profile, the Adobe Color Profile, which is costing us a lot of color. And, you know, everything looks fine. In fact, I can get the white picker here and come over and click on the white target. In fact, just to really mess it up, let's say, oh, that was our white balance, which is pretty ugly. So let's get the white balance picker. I'm going to come over to here, click on that, and now it is perfectly white balanced, but we're still losing a lot of color, particularly these blues, the greens, oh, and a couple of other colors as well. So let's go ahead and apply the profile that we just created. And in the latest version of Lightroom, they are now hidden under here, which is kind of annoying, but anyway. So here it is. Here's the one we just created, 6300 Shohola Falls. And I will close this. Now, there's with the profile. just so you can see, take a look at those colors and look at how all of those colors change when we choose the Adobe standard. So there it is, Adobe standard. There it is with the Shohola Falls. We can see all of the blues have changed. This magenta, this kind of purple color have changed fairly violently, and some other colors have changed slightly. The red's gotten a little darker. Even this orange here has gotten a little darker. So you might be saying, well, Joe, that's all well and fine, but it's just a picture of a color checker. What is this going to do to my images? Well, good that you asked that. Let's go ahead. In fact, I'm going to show you these on full screen. So here's just a kind of an abstract of some of the water flowing by, but watch what happens as I come over the profile, and you can see how the color changes. It's quite dramatic. It's gotten me all my color back in the scene. In fact, I took a panoramic while I was here. Let me come over and get that. So here's a panoramic shot. Oh, I got a little highlight clipping in there, but that's okay. So here is the Adobe color, and here is the profile. So you can see the blues are coming back in the sky. The greens are coming back in the trees. Notice in the trees here, and even the green in the water has now come back. Now we're dealing with a perfect color. Of course, I can then do some more further edits to this. I can take it all the way over to here by boosting the saturation. But by applying the profile and then doing those changes, I have a perfect starting point for all my colors. And it really is quite dramatic. I was also recently out in Valley of Fire near Las Vegas, and I took some shots there, and the color changes, since there was a lot more color, was a lot more dramatic. As much as I love where I live, March around here is kind of boring because there's no leaves on the trees. This area will be really beautiful when the leaves get back, and I will be back here, and I'll probably take this exact same shot. But while we're here, let's take a couple of looks at some images that were shot in Valley of Fire where we had a lot of color to deal with. Welcome to the Valley of Fire in Nevada. I'm about an hour north of the Las Vegas Strip, and it's an absolutely stunning day. So why do I need to create a custom color profile in a bright sunny day out here in Nevada? Well, if you look around, this is Valley of Fire. All the rocks are so red. In fact, it rained this morning a little bit, so everything's actually extra colorful. And you can see around me, there's all this green brush. This red reflecting up is going to diminish the colors of the green, and I don't want that to happen. So I'm going to take a picture of the color checker so that I can create a custom profile for this exact spot, and that will correct for any red sort of color pollution that is coming up and reflecting on everything else. I'm going to go ahead and take a picture of the color checker. Same settings. Now I have everything I need to create a custom color profile, and we'll do that in software later. Let's get some great shots here while the clouds are here, and then we'll move along. All right, so here we are in Valley of Fire, some of the red rocks, and you can see I've got all these green shrubs. And unfortunately, the red orangey rocks, as they reflect up, are decreasing the amount of green because they're kind of polluting the green. But watch what happens when we just kind of hover over our profile, watch the sky and watch the greens, and you can see, look at that as they come in and out. So the sky gets more intense. Actually, the orange and the orange red and the dirt here gets deeper as well. But if you look at some of the greens in some of these bushes, you will say that they come in as well. It's a subtle yet dramatic change in that we're now getting all the color back in the scene that was there simply by creating that profile and then applying it here in Lightroom. And I'll show you one other. All right, this is as you're entering into Valley of Fire from Las Vegas. This is the road that goes down into there. Same thing. Watch the sky and then watch the kind of any of the green tints here in the valley as we hover over the profile, and you can see all of that color that comes back in. Now, of course, like any edit, you might want to go and individually shape colors and boost brightness and things like that. But just seeing the difference in color from applying that profile, it is so dramatic, and it is so nice to have that perfect color starting point for all your images. And that's how easy it is to use the Color Checker Passport. Simply take a picture, bring it into Lightroom, and apply it. Now, some of you are not Lightroom users, so let me just show you real quick how you can create a profile using Adobe Camera Raw. And by the way, if you create a profile in Lightroom or in Adobe Camera Raw, both applications see it. So Photoshop will then see it, or Adobe Camera Raw will see it, as well as Lightroom. They share the profile. So you only have to create it once. Lightroom is very simple since it's built in as a plugin. Photoshop does require one extra step. So let's go ahead into Adobe Camera Raw. All right, so here we are in the latest version of Camera Raw. It's starting to look more and more like Lightroom. And in fact, now if you're in Creative Cloud, chances are you have Lightroom and Photoshop. You might as well go ahead and use it. But if you're just a Photoshop person, here's our target as a raw shot. And what we need to do is one extra step. We need to save this as a DNG file. So I don't have to do any edits to it because, again, remember, it's going to ignore those. So let's just click on Save Image. And the default in Photoshop is digital negative, which is DNG. I'm going to save it in the same place it is right now. Just click on Save, and it will save my raw image of the target as a DNG file. So now I need to open up the application that also comes with the color checker, and it's called Color Checker Camera Calibration, just like the plugin we saw in Lightroom. Okay, so rather than do a drag and drop, I'll just go to File Open or File Add Image, and I will tell it where the DNG was just saved, which happens to be in a folder I happen to call DNG Images. So let's go ahead and get that one. And here it is, the A7R3 target.dng. It'll take that exact same image and load it in here. Now this does require a couple of more steps. However, this application also does provide you with a couple of other options. And you might notice there's some new menu items up on the top here. One's called the Dual Illuminant DNG. That'll take a little more time to explain. We'll do that on a future video. And then there's ICC TIFF, which is for those of you that want to use ICC profiles in software like Capture One or the Canon image processing software. Again, subject for another day. So here's our target loaded in. We can see it has figured out where each of the patches is. If for some reason maybe there was a little bit of shadow cast from your finger, you do have a little bit of leeway to be able to move things around. Best that you don't have to, but you can do it. It's showing you that it's found all the targets. And once again, just like when we were in Lightroom, just click on Create Profile. And it sees in this case what kind of camera it is. So I'll go ahead, I'm just going to shorten it up a bit. And I'll call it Daylight also. And it automatically knows where to put it. Puts it in the profiles automatically. There you go. That's how fast it's been created. And it says applications using this profile may need to be restarted. They're talking about Lightroom. If you were using Photoshop, you would not have to restart. And that's it. That's how you create a profile using the Color Checker Camera Calibration software. And now this same profile will show up in both Adobe Camera Raw and in Lightroom. So that's how easy and important it is to put the Color Checker Passport to use. Now with the new version, with having the 18% gray card at your use, you can now get perfect exposures as well as white balance if you happen to clip the white target, or if you're doing video, you might just find that the gray is going to work a little better for you. So here's yours truly in front of Shahola Falls with the gray card, and then once more with the Color Checker target itself. This is a piece that I have used for years. I use it everywhere I go, and now having the gray card available to me, this is what I'm going to use when I have those tricky situations that I'm not sure about exposure and I don't have, say, a handheld spot meter with me. You can notice that, again, the histogram, if we look up in the upper right, goes right from left to right, but we are not clipping any of these highlights. We've maintained the exposure is perfect, and it's all thanks to this. So if you don't have one, you definitely need to have this, the Color Checker Passport from X-Rite.